Today we're kicking off a brand new series here at Top Shelf Hockey. We're going to analyze all 31 NHL teams' drafting and development records one by one in this series. We're kicking things off here with the Montreal Canadiens, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. In today's NHL, drafting and developing is super important to setting up NHL teams to be successful long-term, to be able to be playoff and Stanley Cup contenders. As we know, we've seen many teams either do really well and some struggle with drafting over the years here. So I thought it'd be a very interesting exercise to do a dedicated video to each and all 31 NHL teams and taking a look at the last 10 years and how their drafting has impacted where their franchises sit today. We're basically looking at three active segments here. The first one, going to analyze their first round draft selections and their success or lack thereof with those picks and how they're impacting their roster here today. Secondly, we're going to take a look at their mid to late round picks and how they've been able to find players later into the draft or not. And lastly, here we're going to take a look at their active rosters that they have today and how many of those players they've actually drafted and developed into their systems on their own. So let's kick things off by taking a look at the Montreal Canadiens' history of their last 10 first-round draft selections. So let's kick things off here with 2009, where the Montreal Canadiens in their first round, number 18 overall, selected Louis Leblanc. Now, Louis Leblanc was a really excited prospect that the Habs fans were really excited for. He played at Harvard, played a really solid year of hockey in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League as well. Ended up only playing 50 career NHL games, did not stick around in the NHL too long before he was quickly out of the league, and probably safe to say that he turned out to be a first round draft bust. But he was French Canadian, he had lots of skill, lots of potential, it was a really hyped prospect, but unfortunately for the Montreal Canadiens, just never really worked out here. Now the following year in 2010, they were selecting 22nd overall, where they took really big defender Jarred Tinordi. Of course, Tinordi is a second generation NHL player. His father was an NHL player for quite a long time, was a defender as well. He so far to date has only played in 76 career games for the most part, has been a career minor leaguer, but he is in the process of resurrecting his NHL career in his late 20s with the Nashville Predators. He did stick with it, and even after leaving the Habs organization, right now currently was captain of their American Hockey League affiliate for the Predators in Milwaukee earlier this year, but due to injuries on the Predators blue line, found himself being called up, and it actually been a pretty decent piece to their top six there on the blue line in the Predators organization. So we'll see if he can find some more success later in his career, but for the most part, Tinordi's been a career minor league defenseman. In 2011, they were picking 17th overall, where they selected from the St. John Sea Dogs defenseman Nathan Beaulieu. Now, Beaulieu's had a reasonably successful NHL career, albeit a lot of it not with Montreal. After about 3 to 4 seasons, he was traded to the Buffalo Sabres for a very late 6th round draft pick. He's gone on to play a few years with Buffalo, and of course has been with the Winnipeg Jets here recently as well. Even though Nathan Beaulieu has been able to stick around the NHL, for a first round pick, he hasn't really had the level of success that many thought he would when he was drafted. For the most part, he's a third pair defenseman, and he's a serviceable guy, can stick around and have a half decent NHL career, but not quite what you think of at first round talent. But he's been gone from the Habs organization for quite some time now. In 2012, they were picking high, number 3 overall, where they selected Alex Galchenyuk. Now, Habs fans are going to be quite familiar with Galchenyuk's story. Of course, to date, he's played 544 games played, 317 points, had a 30-goal season in Montreal, but it certainly was a lightning rod for criticism a lot of the time in Montreal, and also ended up getting traded to the Coyotes, where they brought back Max Domi. Of course, so far I think we can fairly say that trade has been won by the Montreal Canadiens. I know many were skeptical of it when it first happened, myself included, given Domi's lack of success with the Coyotes, but he's worked out quite nicely in Montreal and has produced better than Galchenyuk since that trade. So even though the Habs don't have the first round pick from that year within the team anymore, at least the player that they was traded for has been able to contribute Of course, Galchenyuk's gone on to play after that, be traded to the Penguins, and then again to the Wild. He's bounced around a bit now. It appears to be spiraling downwards, and hard to say how much longer he'll remain in the NHL. I guess we'll have to remain to be seen on that one. Now in 2013, they picked 25th overall, where they selected lanky centerman Michael McCarron. Now McCarron has certainly struggled with his skating and has not developed into a regular NHL player. Finally, he was traded out of the Habs organization earlier this year, where he's now again part of the Predators organization along with Jared Tenorti. He played a total of 69 games played to date in the NHL, and personally I just don't see him as really being a solid NHL talent. He may get a few games here and there, hard to say, but for the most part he will be a career minor leaguer. Now in 2014, they were picking number 26 overall, where they selected Nikita Sherbak. Now he's a Russian-born player, but had been playing some junior hockey in Canada. He was drafted as a fairly highly touted prospect, but for whatever reason just did not develop within the Habs organization after a lack of opportunity. He unfortunately was lost on waivers to the Los Angeles Kings and has since found himself out of the league. He didn't stay with the Kings for too long before he was gone from the NHL. Now in 2015, they once again were picking at number 26, where they selected defenseman Noah Jolson. Now Jolson still is part of the organization and still very well could be a part of the future of this club. It's certainly debatable. He's certainly had his fair share of injuries. He's played a grand total of 44 games played so far. Seems to be a little bit stuck between injuries and being in the minors. I'm not really sure if he will become a regular NHL defenseman or not. I think there is still a possibility. There's still some hope there, but considering how far removed are now from his draft year, we're certainly losing a little bit of hope as time continues to move on, but at least he's still within the Habs organization. In 2016, they ended up picking number 9 overall, where they selected another defenseman, Mikael Circuit. Of course, Circuit was later traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning after only playing a few games with the Montreal Canadiens. Never really get into a full season at all, played 4 games, was traded to Tampa for Jonathan Drouin. Of course, Drouin has been a lightning rod for criticism as well, and certainly had his fair share of struggles, and this year has not gone well for Drouin. Combination of injuries and lack of productivity certainly have not worked out overly well this year. But Sergachev is turning into quite a solid young defenseman with Tampa, one of their better first round picks that have for NHL career wise so far, but again gone from the organization, traded for a player who at least is on the roster but having his fair share of struggles. And I know there's been a lot of talk about Durant possibly being moved. Hard to say if that'll happen this coming off season or what will take place there, but either way, Sergachev no longer with the Habs organization. Now the next 3 picks are still new enough that they're all part of the organization, but of course their futures are somewhat yet to be determined. In 2017, they were picking number 27 overall, where they took forward Ryan Poehling, who of course played some U.S. college hockey, had some good success with the U.S. national team development program as well as the World Juniors. Came in, had a wicked game in his first NHL game, got a hat trick, but it certainly has cooled off since then. Playing in 28 games when was recently assigned not too long ago down to the Laval Rocket in the American Hockey League, where he certainly needs some more seasoning. I don't really think that Ryan Poehling is going to be as big of an offensive player as some thought. That first game he had left quite the impression, but leading into that, before he ever even played, personally I had him projected as probably being a middle 6 forward, possibly center or wing. Hard to say where he's going to fall. He is technically a center iceman, but could be a winger. But Poehling to me is likely going to be a third liner. He's a pretty complete player overall. Just not sure that he has the offensive instincts to play consistently, at least in the top 6. Of course, in 2018, they had a number 3 overall pick. They had some very fortunate luck in the draft lottery, moved up a lot. Then they took center iceman from Finland, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who so far to date played 115 games, put up 42 points, had a pretty decent regular season, but the sophomore season has not gone well for Kotkaniemi. Found himself playing in the minors now for some time. Many feel he was rushed a little bit to the NHL, probably wasn't fully ready, could have really benefited from maybe another season over in Europe or more time in the minors before getting a regular NHL role. Either way, that's up for debate right now. I guess we'll see how things go. He still appears to be a decent part of the team's future. I mean, we're only a year plus removed from his draft time, so it's really early to say what his future is going to hold. But as of right now, many were surprised with the selection, I guess you could say. Not the fact that, if you look at the fact that they were short with center iceman, it's not a big surprise. But when you look at other guys in the draft who came right after him, like a Brady Tkachuk, who now has back-to-back really solid seasons, 20+ goals, playing a very physical style. I know there are some people might wish that the Habs picked differently, but I guess it's really early to tell just how that's going to go. We'll have to wait and see how Kotkaniemi develops here longer term. And of course, in 2019, they were picking number 15 overall, and so far it looks like they might have been able to grab themselves a draft steal in sniper Col Caulfield, who certainly tore up the United States National Team Development Program records with Jack Hughes scoring at a record pace. He's playing college hockey in Wisconsin, and we've heard recent comments here in an interview by Marc Bergevin about the future, saying that he really is going to encourage Caufield to play another year of college hockey, that he doesn't feel he's quite ready for pro hockey, which I found quite surprising considering how well Caufield did leading into the draft. I think he's had a pretty solid college season. I really thought they would be all over him to sign and come out of college hockey and jump to the pros as early as next year. But hearing those comments, based on what I've seen, at least, the few highlights and statistics wise, Caufield appears to be doing well. So not really sure exactly what their plans are for Caufield here, but I guess we'll have to remain to be seen what they do. But clearly, he does appear to have a lot of potential. It's still way too early to say what exactly his role will be on the team in the future. I'm sure Habs fans and the team would like him to be a first-line sniper, but I guess we'll have to see if he can live up to that potential or not as he continues his development here. So that is the history of the first-round picks in the last 10 drafts by the Montreal Canadiens. Unfortunately, we cannot say that any of them are actively on the Montreal Canadiens roster, which is certainly a big problem. But as I mentioned, the last 3 are still strong possibilities to be able to become a part of that and become regular NHL players. We've seen Kotkaniemi already have a regular role last year. If those 3 can continue to develop and get into solid roles like they're expected to, and we kind of revisit this kind of video in a few years' time, and we have those 3, consistently back to back becoming part of the team, that will certainly change the outlook here. But as of today, we can't say that they have any of their first rounders from the last 10 years being active current members of the rosters as I record this video. Now let's jump over and take a look at any of their mid-round or late-round selections from that same time frame that have developed into NHL players at all. Now, as you can see here, they really haven't had a ton of players, especially in the earlier part of the last decade. 2009, 10, and 11, they didn't have any mid to late round picks make the NHL in any capacity with their organization or otherwise. So that's certainly not great news. In 2012, they did have Charles Hudon, who is with the organization but is not a regular consistent player. He's been up and down, played more in the minors than the NHL. He's got 120 games to his NHL experience so far, putting up 40 points. In 2013, they did grab some mid-round picks that have played in the NHL, only one with the organization still, and that's Arturi Lehkonen. They also did grab Sven Andrighetto and Jacob Delarose. I don't really see Delarose being a long-term NHL player. Andrighetto, on the other hand, has played a decent role since he's moved on from Montreal. In 2014, they grabbed Jake Evans with the 7th round pick. Of course, he stayed in college hockey and played his full 4 years, so he's only in his second year pro, and we've seen him get a recent opportunity with Montreal. So it's still a little bit early to really evaluate him as a pro hockey player. In 2016, they were able to get Victor Mete with a 4th round pick. Of course, he's had a decent time in the NHL so far, playing in 171 games, putting up 31 points. It seemed like it took him forever to score his first NHL goal, but he finally got it, and it's certainly improved offensively, I think, this year, now battling some injuries. Now 2017 and 18, which is still a little bit early to tell how these players are going to work out, but are still considered relatively good prospects for the organization, include Josh Brook, Cale Fleury, and Caden Primo in 2017. Of course, Primo was a 7th round pick and could turn out to be a steal based on how he's projecting so far. And of course, in 2018, they grabbed Alex Romanov and Jesse Ylonen, and still both of those guys appear to be solid prospects as well, with Romanov probably being the most excited prospect they have right now in the entire organization, along with goaltender Caden Primo. Now let's jump over and take a look at their current roster and see which players that are actively playing for Montreal were actually drafted and developed by the organization. Now, as you can see here, the Montreal Canadiens don't have a big roster of drafted players. They have Carey Price, of course, their starting goaltender, who was drafted way back in the first round now in 2005. One of their better draft selections in their recent history here. Not for them, they have Brendan Gallagher, who they took in 2010 as a 5th round pick. That was a nice pickup late in the draft. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, some other mid-rounders. They have Arturi Lehkonen, 2nd rounder from 2013. And of course, you get Victor Mete, 4th rounder from 2016. Jake Evans is, not really a regular as of yet, but has a few games lately under his belt. A 7th rounder in 2014. And of course, Charles Hudon from 2012 as well, who's been an up and down. So, not really a regular by any means. If you take a look at their active roster in early March of 2020, as I make this video right now, they have about 6 players in their active roster that we can say were drafted and developed by the organization, but a couple of them are really not regulars as of yet. Now, 6 players on the roster only represents about 27%, so that's really a pretty low number, at least it seems. I guess as we dive deeper into this series, we'll see how Montreal compares to other organizations. But as we know, the Montreal Canadiens have certainly had a lack of playoff appearances and a lack of playoff success in recent years. And if you take a look at all this drafting and developing record here in the last decade, it certainly makes a lot of sense. Now, in that 10-year period, they've had 80 draft selections, but the last 2 years they've had a lot more than usual, so a big chunk of those have come between 2018 and 2019. So they certainly have a lot of picks that are still too early to evaluate, but from 2009 through 2011, 12, 13, there's really nothing there that really jumps out as, for a star power to have any kind of major impact on the organization. So as some of these core players and key members of their team, like Carey Price and Shea Weber and Brendan Gallagher, etc., start to get a little bit older here, they don't have that other younger wave of players that have been able to come up and make this team even stronger. The lack of success that they've had in the first round also not helping matters at all. Of course, a lot of times they were picking later in the first round, but still, even when they were able to pick higher, like the Galchenyuk pick, obviously that one did not work out. And obviously we hope that the Kotkaniemi pick, being number 3 overall, works out. But right now, like I said, there is some question marks around it, but still way too early to go as far as calling him a player who's not going to work out or bust or anything of that nature. It's only his 2nd year. There's lots of time for him to grow and get better and become a solid member of the Habs organization. So I guess we'll have to remain to be seen. But in recent years, the last couple of years, they do appear right now at least to have drafted pretty well and picked up lots of interesting prospects. But like I said, there was such a big period of time where that just wasn't happening before. And some of that was before the current GM, Marc Bergevin's time. But Trevor Timmins, who's been with the organization for several years, even before Bergevin was in the picture, has long been a big part of the amateur draft. So clearly, even though Bergevin has only been in the picture since 2012, there's certainly, other pieces of the organization have been around a lot longer and have contributed to this lack of drafting success. So hopefully these more recent picks that we've seen, like Poehling and Kotkaniemi and Caufield, all work out and become big members of the organization here and really help move this team forward. But for right now, I think we can fair to say that the Montreal Canadiens in the last decade at least have not done the greatest job with drafting and developing players, which is why they find themselves more often than not on the outside looking into the playoffs and have not been able to contend for the Stanley Cup in quite some time. So of course, as always, we'll know your thoughts and opinions on this new series. Love to know your thoughts and opinions on the Montreal Canadiens drafting record over the past decade. Do you think some of the more recent prospects that are still developing will be able to change the record of the Habs drafting record here, and in a few years' time we look back, we'll have a very different opinion on how these drafts have gone? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to this channel and new to this series, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future content, and check out our channel membership options if you haven't already done so. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.